Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this Blitz chess postmortem. This is a postmortem of my Blitz game number 242. I was white here. Kicked off with d4, and my opponent played the very unusual move knight c6. So I learned later this was called the Lundin defense, named after a chess master, Lundin, Lundin, not the city of London, Lundin maybe. Anyway, interesting defense. I guess it's sort of encouraging me to play d5, but of course the d-pawn is already defended, so it seems logical to play e4, although the engine thinks d5 is a good move there too. But just putting another pawn in the center can't be too bad. And actually, with this move, we've transposed into a defense known as the Nimzowitsch defense. If you play e4, knight c6, that's the Nimzowitsch defense, and a common response then is d4. So you could also think of this as the Nimzowitsch defense. But because the move order d4, knight c6, technically it's the Lundin defense. So it's possible to play d5 or e5 here. I think Nimzowitsch had the original idea to play d5, but later this move was played. They're both okay, although these openings are somewhat dubious. I mean, there's a bigger than usual opening advantage to white in these lines. But you won't see it in the game. I didn't play the most accurate moves. Although my next move here, knight f3, just developing a piece, makes sense. And also attacking the e-pawn, so he has to defend. And then this move h4 is a bit peculiar. Probably the best thing is just to continue developing, even though it actually is in the opening book, so this has been tried before, this h4. But the chess engine prefers developing moves, so that's probably the way to go. And so anyway, the idea with h4 is to play h5, kick the knight, and then win the pawn. Pretty simple. But it can be stopped with h5. And it's not clear who benefited from this. I mean, white gets a good square here on g5, but black gets a good square here on g4. So, there's concessions made by both sides here. I play bishop g5 immediately, and he blocks with knight f6. The only thing I found really funny is that we were still in an opening, in a position that was known to the opening book, because I thought this whole thing was pretty strange. So if I played knight c3 here, which actually looks like the best move, just continuing to develop a piece, then I would still be in the opening book. But I played bishop d3 instead, and I think this is just not the best square, not the best square for the bishop. I want to defend the e-pawn in case this knight is unpinned, right? For example, by bishop e7, I would unpin the knight and this pawn would come under threat. But I don't even need to defend it immediately, and if I do defend it, it's probably better defended with the knight rather than the bishop. And the bishop might want to go to e2, because as you'll see in the game, well, we'll see in a few moves, plays bishop c5 first, castle, d6, these are all pretty normal. I play a4, with the idea of trapping the bishop. If I were to get in the move queen to e2, then there's a threat of b4, a5, and this bishop has no squares. So he immediately reacts to that threat with a6. And I think the chess engine thinks that was a waste of time, that maneuver. So black is basically equalized here. Finally, I play knight c3, which is probably the most logical way to defend this pawn in the first place, and makes that bishop somewhat redundant, the bishop on d3. I guess at this point, earlier I hadn't decided what to do with the c-pawn, but eventually I decided that putting the c-pawn on c4 would just block in this bishop, and it looks like I'm never going to be able to advance it and open up, so just developing the knight made sense. And now bishop g4, and now you can see what I mean about this pin. I end up just moving the bishop back to e2, so clearly I've wasted time in the opening and allowed black to equalize with these somewhat peculiar pawn moves on the flanks. They had some motivation, but not sufficient calculation, I guess. There was no real big threat on either of them. What threats there were easily dealt with. Okay, so black continues with queen d7. I push on with a5. Well, once I have the pawn out here, I figure I might as well try and use it. Maybe in the endgame, this b-pawn will become backwards and the target. So that's not necessarily a bad move, but knight h7 is a pretty good move from black, hitting my bishop, and I'm just going to have I have some trouble over here keeping hold of all my pawns. I go after his bishop with knight h2, and then there's an exchange, and he takes my bishop, and now we're in this situation where I have this pawn on g5, which is a bit, I mean, in some situations it could be a strength if I manage to use it in an attack on the king side, but it just doesn't appear to be happening in this case. This pin on my f-pawn is pretty annoying, so I can never play, well, I would have to move my king first, but it slows down the idea of playing the move f2 to f4, trying to break up the center, which might actually make some sense of this g-pawn, but it's hard to get that move in. And black has good moves here. He puts a knight on f4, hitting my queen with tempo, so I have to move the queen, then queen e7 going after the g-pawn. And I chose to defend it. Chess Engine says I could try knight e2 here, which would basically give up the pawn, but maybe I get something else. Well, I get rid of his strong knight, so that would be worth something. Knight to e2. Okay, but I defended the pawn. Bishop to d4 was played, going after my knight. And I went rook f, e1. I just want to defend this pawn, the e-pawn, in case this guy gets traded, although the e-pawn is not under attack at the moment. Anyway, he goes g6, shoring up his structure. Knight f3. Yeah, I get my knight back in the game. And black here misses his best chance, right? The way for black to keep the advantage is to play the move h4 and just try and discourage my pieces. It's a pawn sack here. Let's take a look at this. h4, knight takes h4, and f6. So just opening up the whole king side. Yeah, it's not obvious here. This would be great. What can I play? Just knight f3, it's recommending for white. What's wrong with taking? Queen h7. Ah, the idea is this open h-file is dangerous. And maybe I'm losing a piece here or something. Okay, so knight f3 to defend the square h2. Queen h7 anyway. And now queen h2. Exchange, knight takes. And bishop takes f2. Oh, that's a neat trick. Okay, so that's what the computer is seeing. It's this, if I take the bishop, he takes the knight. And then I've got this peculiar pawn structure here too. And can't I still take on f3? Well, no, there's this threat on my pawn. How about rook there? F takes g5. So black has won a pawn, and he's activated his pieces. So kind of a neat trick. Let's back up here. So okay, I'm not surprised my opponent didn't see that. Oops, where were we? We were in this position here. Cancel that. Yeah. Yeah. So h4, knight takes, f6, opening up a line for the queen to come over to the h-file. And then an exchange on h2, and then at the end bishop takes f2. And he wins this pawn and leaves me a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, so that's how black could proceed with advantage. After bishop a7, well, that's a hard thing to spot in a blitz game, I have to admit. I wouldn't have found anything like that. Well, the game is about even, so we continue developing. There's takes on e2, c6, and I try to get some pressure on the central pawns. Yeah, so I guess except for that one tactic, black never really had a big advantage in this game. That was his one chance to really push through, was that h4 tactic, which is pretty hard to see. So at this point, white has regained his slight opening edge. I felt like I was maybe getting some pressure on the center pawns here. And knight h4, not the most accurate move there. What the engine? Yeah, it was hard to tell what to do with the knight. The engine likes the idea of regrouping to e1, and then well, it moves it back to f3 after a while in that line. Knight e1, d5, knight f3. That's pretty strange. Okay, so I'm trying to find something constructive to do with my knight, and black is activating his pieces. grabs a pawn. Maybe that pawn grab was not a mistake. No, I guess the pawn grab was okay. After queen takes g5, I could have played knight f3 first, and that I realized that. After I played rook takes d4, it's probably a little stronger because it's a fork of the queen and the rook, and he can get out of it by taking on d2. And the queen has to move. And then I take on a6. Yeah, I was missing this queen takes a6 idea at this point. I hadn't spotted that. So that's why that would be a little better. My opponent missed it too. So rook takes, pawn takes. And then my idea was knight f3, and I can grab the pawn here. But black has a good response, and black could take the pawn on a5, which not only grabs a pawn, but also defends the a6 pawn. So actually this next move is the move that loses the game. Up until this point it's been, on either side of even. Neither side had more than a one pawn advantage. It was always less than a pawn. So just a slight edge for one side or the other. But after queen f6, it's a big advantage to white. And I wasn't, it was a sudden turn of events. I wasn't realizing how strong white's position is here. But after I grab a pawn, he's got to move the bishop. He can't even defend the c pawn. He goes bishop c5, which is one of the engine moves, and then I can just take on c6. And he went queen to g7. So I don't know if so queen g7 was not the best move, but I guess even at this point I have a two-pawn advantage, and the threat of this outside pass pawn is pretty strong. I'm not sure what he... I'm still not sure why he resigned exactly at this point. But there's this neat tactic right here that the computer points out that I can play b4, and when the bishop takes, then I have queen to b6. It's a fork, hitting the rook and the bishop. So I'm going to win a piece that way. If he doesn't take, he could play d3 or something. I guess the bishop has no good square. The bishop goes back here. And b5. Okay, and I have these killer pawns going forward. So I actually have a winning position here after... okay, that wasn't played. Queen g7 was how the game ended. So actually I have a winning position here, but I don't think I would have spotted this b4 move. That's a pretty cute tactic. But my opponent resigned after queen g7, so I guess he felt the position was hopeless for him. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.